what the issues were, and for your failure to tell us what were your qualifications to be president. What are they, Frank? What are they?
Of course, let me say first, Dan, that today, Tom, that today is Pearl Harbor Day. It was 41 years ago today that we were hit, and we were hit hard. But did I say Pearl Harbor Day? I meant Pearl Bailey Day. It's the anniversary of our bombing at the White House. It wasn't a pretty sight, but I am ready to be president. Ronald Reagan said I was the best vice president in his memory. I think that ought to count for something. Well, but I have the experience. I served as president for 8 hours, Tom.
Mr.
8
Bush.
hours. And when you take into consideration the time he spent on the job, long vacations, naps, about 8 hours is what he spent on the job. I'm ready to serve.
Now, Mr. Bush, tell me, you puzzle me because I have known you in the past as a moderate man, and during this campaign you have seemed to be just a machine gun for the right wing of the Republican Party. And they've run a pretty dirty campaign. Everybody thinks that.
Well, I want to see a kinder, gentler campaign, yes. But as far as sleaze and dirty campaigns, I'm going to take him to the cleaners on Election Day. And I might have to take my suits in, see if they can get rid of the mud that he slings at me. I'm not a card-carrying member of the ACLU. I don't want to see In God We Trust taken off the currency. I don't want to see kiddie porn. Kiddie porn, what my opponent does with his wife Kitty behind closed doors is none of my business. I don't want to know about it.
Mr. Vice President, the black vote and the Hispanic vote in Texas and California are very big. Both Senator Benson and Michael Dukakis speak Spanish, and now to you, Mr. Quayle.
Well, I don't think we need a president who can speak Spanish. I think we need a president who can speak gibberish, and I am that man, and I ask your support. I've got, the women, the blacks, and others on the fringe. I support you. I do. And making fun of a man's name, J. Danforth Quayle. Do you know what who J. Danforth was? Well, neither do I, but that's beside
Well,
the
listen,
point.
if you're elected, Barbara Bush will be the First Lady. Nancy Reagan had Just Say No to Drugs, a huge success. What will Barr do?
Barr? You know Barr. She's always been right there, and she's going to be working with the kids, just like Nancy Reagan has done. She's going to be getting them to learn to read. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And to conquer illiteracy. Right now they're looking for a name for the program. They can't think of a word. Maybe just say to illiteracy. I don't know. We're going to be working on it. Read my lips.
Governor Dukakis, the polls say that you're still way behind. In the Electoral College, you're way behind.
As far as what the polls say, Tom, it's not that I don't believe what the polls are telling me. I know the polls to be decent, hard-working Americans who appreciate what they have. If you happen to be the son of Greek immigrants who came to this land looking for economic opportunity, a land where their boy could grow up to perform miracles, marry a Jewish girl, and one day go on to learn to speak Spanish, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, now, Governor, I asked George Bush to be specific, and I'm going to ask you. Governor, what would you do to reduce the deficit?
Well, I think that the president has to make some hard, tough choices.
Come on, Governor, be specific.
The president has to make some hard, tough choices. Choices on good jobs for good wages, good teachers at good schools, good pepperoni for good pizza, good punchlines for good jokes. How many White House assistants does it take to screw in a light bulb? The answer is none. The answer, my friends, is none. Because Ronald Reagan enjoys being kept in the dark. And these are the kind of things that I think you're not going to see. I've told you, I think the only way we can successfully reduce that overwhelming deficit is with the kind of strong and effective leadership I think I provided the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, balancing 10 consecutive budgets, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Braden.
All right.
Well, I'd just like to say something about that over there. You're talking about, I'd like to call him,
You might have to bleep me out on this, but he's a liberal. That's what he is a liberal. Well, I'm not the one who did business with a drug-running Panamanian dictator. I'm not the one who sold arms to the Ayatollah. You know, you talk about hard choices. I'm going to be a strict president. The way I was a strict governor and a strict father. You know, my son, John...
Don't you have anything nice to say 4 days before the election, Mr. Vice President? Don't you have anything nice to say about your opponent or to the audience?
Well, first, I want to say something that I got to believe that as far as the vice president goes, I know my son, John, we caught him. He smashed up the family car and snowblower, and I grounded him for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Of course, he was furloughed in a couple of days, but... Well, I want to tell you something about that. My son, Jeb, we caught him. He smashed up the family car. We didn't ground him for 6 months or 6 weeks like my Democratic opponent. I gave my son the death penalty.
Thank you, Governor Dukakis. Thank you, Vice President Bush. And in the next chapter of this scenario, we will be joined by none other than President Ronald Reagan. We'll be right back. President of the United States, Mr. Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan,
What?
you've been out on the campaign bashing liberals, just like one of the candidates. Tell me, is that right?
Well, coming from you, I don't see how... You're a perfect example, Tom Braden, of where we failed in our public schools. Now, I don't think... Well, God bless you, right, Pat. I certainly did. You know, I'll have you know that we shouldn't end up with one of those doom and gloom peddling Democrats they oppose abortion. They favor abortion. I think it's wrong. Unborn humans have rights. That is until they're born anyway. And then they have the right to remain silent.
Mr. President, what were your basically, you're going to go back to California, what were your major accomplishments?
My major accomplishments, I'm pleased to say, well, we met with Mr. Gorbachev and we had one of those treaties that they have over there. And I'll have you know that when I first came into office, they asked me if I would meet with Brezhnev, and I said no. Then he died. They asked me if I'd meet with Andropov, and I said no, and then he died. And asked me if I'd meet with Chernenko, and by then I was starting to catch on. I said no, and then he died. So naturally, when they asked me if I'd meet with Gorbachev, I said no. Let's see if we can go 4 for 4. They're dropping like flies. But we did work out one of those treaties.
Mr. President, can you imagine Dukakis as President of the United States?
No, I can't. I certainly can't, and I don't want to see it come to that because George Bush is the best man to lead this land and carry on the Reagan Revolution and further the Reagan era.
Now, tell me, Mr. President,
Mr. President, are you embarrassed by these stories about Nancy borrowing $1 million worth of clothes?
No.
I'm sorry to bring it up.
I am sorry you did bring it up because we all have our, we all have our weaknesses. We've been trying to get her into a program, all right? Just say no to clothes. We're doing what we can, and Nancy's trying to behave.
You picked George Bush, and George Bush picked Dan Quayle.
Yes. Well, by the time I was leaving New Orleans, George still hadn't made up his mind on whom to select. George didn't even have a mind of his own until I got on that plane and went away. But Nancy was saluted by the Just Say No kids in New Orleans, and evidently George was sufficiently impressed because he appointed one of those Just Say No kids as his running mate. But I think Dan Quayle is a fine lad, and he and his grandmother and his dad will make fine vice presidents.
Mr. President, thank you very much for being our guest on Crossfire. We'll have just a minute or two with the vice presidential candidates, Mr. Quayle and